You're alive.
Yippee. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 16, 2023, 5:30 PM Finance Committee meeting. We will call it to order. Beginning over here with Diane
Potter.
Colin McGough.
Becky Fless, administrative staff.
Pat Hopkins, Superintendent.
Andrea Dish, Business Manager.
Terry McGuire, Director of Technology.
Thank you. First on the agenda is the fiscal year 2023 budget, the quarterly financials.
So every quarter I send to the Finance Committee quarterly financial reports. It's the same report, 4 reports every quarter. They're just updated to the quarter end. And I thought that we would take a moment to review those quickly. So in front of you, or each of you should have
That's not gonna work. There we go.
So the first report that I'm going to look at is the Finance Committee, the quarterly. It's actually an expenditure report. If you look at the report, there's the adopted budget amendments, the revised budget, which includes the amendments. The reported period is expenditures through that period. So you'll see on this report, expenditures through 7/1/22 through 3/30/23. Encumbrances, those are POs that are still outstanding as of 3/31, and amount remaining in the budget, as well as the percentage remaining. So at thumb glance, when I look at these at a glance, I'm really looking that going into the fourth quarter, there's at least 25% remaining. So, that is the most of our expenditures are salaries. And so it's pretty equitable between quarters. So I am looking to make sure that nothing looks funky. So if you look at the only one that's slightly below 25% is student and staff support. And that's because technology typically buys most of their purchases for technology purchases, obviously, at the beginning of the school year. So there's a large, those expenditures aren't coming in the fourth quarter, but any questions about this report? Colin.
One appreciation and question. The appreciation is thank you, team, for the good stewardship, because seeing everything above the 25% mark is a good hallmark of financial diligence. Nice job, Andrea. And the two questions are, do you have any concerns that the total student, staff, and support bucket will make it to the end of the fiscal year?
I have no concerns that we have enough. I see this with this particular bucket every year. It's just how, it has both Angela curriculum and Terry, and those expenditures are always front-loaded at the beginning of the school year. So it's just the way it happens.
And the second was under the total other commitments, the 216,000.
Yep.
That's obviously unspent. What was that?
So the 216,000 was the district's appropriation to food service. I don't anticipate that we will need it. So what happens at the end of the year typically is I will accrue the summer salaries for food service and see if the food service account is in the negative, and then I will just transfer enough to bring it to zero. And this year, because of the new funding mechanism for funding school lunch or providing or having the state pay for lunch rather, we haven't driven that account into the negative. So I don't anticipate having to use it. Other questions? Okay. The next one I'm going to look at is we're going to look at revenues that, since we just looked at expenditures. So similar report. On this report, however, you need to keep in mind that our system tracks revenues as a bracketed number or a minus number. So don't get alarmed when you see that. The first section is Fund 1000 is our general fund. It's where our budget resides. There's a few accounts that are like 100, the one below, the very last one in the Fund 1000, Fund 1000, the revenue carryover, we never cut a check to ourselves for carry forward. So it looks like 100% is outstanding, but that's not really the case. It's just using unallocated fund balance. The state of Maine SAC, you'll see that I budgeted 21,000. We've brought in additional revenues, so it shows up as a negative 31.69. That's actually additional revenue over and above what was budgeted. Transportation fees, it's still expecting 92% to come in. The great thing about that is if there aren't any revenue, there are no fees, meaning we didn't transport anybody. So it's a zero-sum balance. So typically that account is used when the PTAs or PTGs will pay for us to transport kids. So we have the expenditure and they reimburse us. That hasn't occurred yet. I don't see anything in Fund 1000 that I'm concerned about. Everything is right on pace. Tuition, you can see that, where are we? Secondary tuition, that's slower coming in, but the other one, secondary regular tuition is lower, but special ed tuition is higher. I never know from year to year what kids are going to return from the schools that tuition us, so it's always based on a little bit of history and how things have trended over the years. So I'm comfortable with that. I still also have half a year of tuition billing to do, so I know that's coming in, so I'm not concerned. Any concerns about the general fund? And then I'll skip down to the next section. So the next, I should give you a second to decide if you have a question. Anybody else have? Next section is adult ed. This is where their instructional programs reside. Again, you can see we don't transfer from his carryover. It's just there. So you'll see his carryover shows 100% outstanding. Fund transfer enrichment, those aren't really, those transfers aren't really made. And when we look at the fund balances, I'll show you what I mean by that. The fund transfer from general ed, the 14,500 before the end of the year, I will transfer 14,500 from the general budget, which is what we appropriate for adult ed to his program. So that will close that gap, but everything else is there for his instructional programs. The next section is called 2000. It's special revenues. It's where our grants reside. And we bill on those. I try to keep up with it monthly. There's a struggle with the state. They only allow you to invoice one at a time, and sometimes there's a 2, 3, 4 week turnover in the amount of time it takes for them to approve an invoice. So we can only invoice as fast as they approve. So by the end of the year, I'm hoping that it will be caught up. But that's where we are with all of our grant funded, our grants and the revenue. On the backside is food service, Fund 2930. It's where our food service resides. And I'm comfortable with what I see, and you'll see, I think things look really good, which is why I'm confident that we're not going to need the additional. I can see what's still outstanding. We're in a good place. The next fund is 6150, which is actually the adult ed enrichment classes. You can see with his regular enrichment classes, he's down only about $2,400. You will see that there are no trip receipts. So the 30,000 that he thought that we might get, we haven't done any trip classes this year. And then the last revenue for adult ed and enrichment is driver's ed. We budgeted 75. We brought in 600. I think that's slower than what we thought it would be. Revenue agency, it's actually, this account is actually an agency fund. It's not district money, and it actually houses where the students who put money on their lunch accounts, where that resides. It's not our money, we just are a caretaker, and as those funds are spent, it gets transferred from that account to the school lunch account for daily sales. Questions?
A logistical one. So when you put, when you go through, what's the lunch account? The online lunch account,
Yep,
what is that called?
NutriKids.
Yes, when you put money on NutriKids, what's the pathway that gets that money to us?
They dump it right into our bank account.
No kidding.
So when we were selling bricks through, so NutriKids,
Yes, yeah.
it's actually not called NutriKids. What's it?
It's about, yeah, it's
NutriKids is actually our lunch program software. What is it called?
school box.
School box.
My school box.
Thank
That's what it
you.
is. That's what it is.
So when we were buying, people were buying bricks with my school box, that was just getting dumped in. I had created I didn't create a bank account. I opened a bank account for things to get dumped in it so we'd know what was in it before we made the transfer to the general account or the school lunch account.
I've always wondered that. How does
Nope,
that happen?
they do it automatically.
Maybe a few steps.
Mhm.
That's cool.
And the rest of the accounts you see are actually the beginning of the student activity accounts. I don't know if I missed I missed a page. Sorry. I only printed 2 of 3, but we'll see that on the activity statement reports that I printed out. Before I do that, we're going to look at the net asset. So the net asset summary report is actually your beginning balance, and it's not the audited balance. So the audited balance includes things like accrued payroll, because we have our summer salaries for teachers and for ed techs who spread their pay. That needs to get accrued to the prior year budget, even though it's being paid over the summer. It's an expenditure that was incurred in the prior school year. So this may not match what you see on your audited fund balance, because the auditors, there are some things that change, okay? What you see now is total revenues that we've brought in for this year and total expenses by fund account. So we were talking about on the revenue report, I started to go through each of the funds with you. So Fund 1000 is our budget account. You can see where we are now. I'm gonna put these back on because it's so small. Fund 1500, as I mentioned, is the adult ed instructional account. Now, the adult ed has 2 accounts on the net asset. And don't be panicked by the minus 90,000. It actually nets against the 6150 below. So then the Fund 1500 is his instructional, and the 6150 is where his enrichment monies are. Fund 2000 is our grant, so there's obviously some billings that needs to be done in grants. Fund 2100 is where the 300,000 is sitting in that special ed reserve account for special ed that we talked about during budget. Fund 2930 is the school lunch account, or it's the food service account. Fund 4500 is the 50,000 that we talked about being in a capital reserve account that we put there years ago. Fund 6150, I just covered with you. It's the enrichment for adult ed. And on the back side are all of the fund balances of the net asset summaries for each of the student activity accounts or school activity accounts that you will see again on this next page. And that's where they reside. And none of the we oversee the software that they use. It's actually a part of our software. So we can see everything they do through their school school or student activity accounts. They are not allowed to bring those accounts to zero. So that's where the balance stands at this moment. Questions about the net asset summary report?
Andrea, next quarter, I guess, would it be possible to have the fund names along with the fund numbers?
I'll see if I can do it in the system. You probably won't get one for next quarter. What you'll get
Or key?
What you'll get is the audited financial statements.
Okay.
Because and those usually take a while. There are things that happen between the end of the year and the closing, such as the accruing of summer salaries, but I'll see what I can do for you. Or at least I'll give you, like you said, a cheat sheet.
Cheat sheet, like
Cheat sheet.
acronyms.
Okay, so the last one that I gave you is, it's a student activity or school activity account by cash account. So you will see that each of the schools has their own cash account. And nested within the schools for student activity accounts are several different accounts. So our accounting system tracks all of these, what we call them activities, separately. And added together, they make the balance of these student activity accounts. The last one that you will see is actually our scholarship account that is maintained here at the business office, and it's the balance of its scholarship accounts. So obviously, with the exception of the scholarship account, there's a lot of activity that goes through the middle school and the high school accounts. They're typically pretty busy.
A lot of scholarship accounts.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
My graduation takes so long, and class day.
right.
My graduation and class day takes so long.
And this is only a part of them. Not all of our scholarships are housed here.
Right, yeah.
So some of them go to the sponsor, and the sponsor issues the checks directly.
Yeah.
These are only the accounts that they maintain their funds with the district. Yeah,
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
Why is the fuel depot fund under scholarship?
Because we had to keep it separate. It's not our money. So you will hear, and it's been that way forever. I have just never moved it. So let me explain what's going on. So the fuel depot actually sits on the city of Gardner's land, but it's our building and our infrastructure on their land. And the two of us together, the city and the district, partnered together to run the fuel depot. We do most of the day-to-day operations of the fuel depot, Gabe and Jeff. And years ago, years ago, they put an agreement in place that renews every, I want to say 10 years. And years ago, when this agreement was put in place, it was agreed upon that the MSAD11 and the city of Gardner would each put into a fund annually money for infrastructure repairs to the fuel depot. Not necessarily our building, but to the pumps and for pavement and for the tanks. So whenever there's a costly repair, or if there's something that we need to do, it's taken out of the fuel depot account. And that's just where those checks before I even became business manager, that's where they went, and I've just never moved them. But yes, that's why they're there.
The ones that have zeros, but there's nothing in those scholarship funds, are those ones that have just sort of
Yeah, they just died away.
passed away?
I didn't hide. I don't think when I run the report, I can have the option of hiding old accounts, and I didn't.
No, that's fine. It's good to see that as well.
Mhm. Yep. That's everything.
Will anybody add to those at any time?
Typically not the old ones. Some of those have, glancing at those, those
Just
have been zero for a while.
There's a couple that I vividly remember.
Judy Dean.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Maureen Dawson.
Names of staff members gone too soon. Yep.
Yeah.
Questions?
I know you've got hundreds of different accounts here in like a broad brush. What's the process for requesting funds from these accounts and what's the approval process?
So we have an actual manual for the school activity accounts. So there is both a receipt and there is both an expenditure voucher. So in order for the expenditure voucher, the secretary or the administrative assistant needs to provide a backup, and it needs to be approved by the principal, only the building principals. And Pat and I have signing privileges on any of these accounts. I or Pat only typically sign when it's a reimbursement to the building administrator, because obviously they can't approve their own reimbursements. So there is a manual that we have that we've put together telling administrative assistants how they need to have their deposits double checked by somebody. And everything gets run through our accounting software. They are supposed to scan everything and attach it to the software. So at any time, if we see a check, I can I'm trying to think of dig into it, or I can drill into it and I can see what the backup is for that expense. Annually, when the auditor gets here, he picks 2 accounts to audit. Typically, one is always either the high school or the middle school, and then he picks an elementary account to make sure that everybody has their backup. In addition, we had hoped that the new person would be spot checking through the year as well. If you listen to the auditor talk, they will say that a lot of the issues that schools have with their audits have to do with the school checking accounts, that is oversight is an issue.
It sounds like your approval process is pretty good though.
Yeah,
On the receivable side, again, guessing you get a lot of small personal checks and cash for paying for like boosters.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You feel satisfied with the current system for accounting for receivables?
So typically what happens with the activities is the person who's in charge of the activity will count it and then give it to the and then sign off on it, and then give it to the administrative assistant who signs the receipt as well, so that there's 2 pairs of eyes. The same thing if somebody brings a deposit here. Whoever brings a deposit counts it before they give it to Colleen, signs off on it, and then Colleen double checks it before the funds are transferred. It's just a lot of internal controls. So it's just sometimes tedious but necessary.
We've had problems in the past, not
During
during your tenure, but we've had problems in the past, probably 15 to 18 years ago.
Yeah, before we
couple of
put
times.
the ADS student activity tracker in.
It's good not to have those anymore.
And I think a lot of the problems that we had in the past had to do with GTA accounts, or not GTA, but PTA accounts.
You know,
Because
when
there's,
I first moved here, I was trying to Google if Gardner had a PTA association. That was the first thing that came up.
and it wasn't so much about these accounts, but the accounts that they have, that we have no access to. And that's where the problems resided. So we have been trying to advocate for them to put their money in our accounts. Obviously, it's maintained separately, but it would be a good internal. It's not technically our money, but it's raised for our students. So there's a line there.
It's a safety net, honestly.
Well, thank you. It sounds like you have a great handle on it.
Thanks, Helen.
Better than some I've seen.
Next on the agenda is meeting with the municipal officials.
So next week,
Monday, I believe.
Yes, Monday. We are supposed to meet with the elected officials at 6:00 here. I wanted to share with you, and I'm not sure how to do this, Terry. If I go to share screen, all I get is whiteboard, Google Chrome, and my desktop.
Does it say entire screen?
No. So maybe we won't spend the time doing it, but I wanted to kind of review with you what I have put together so far with the draft. It still needs to be updated, and to see
Isn't
whether,
that right there?
no, it's right there.
Click on land. Click on
Um,
that,
the what?
just shut it and then try it again, back to the Zoom. Yeah, try share your screen again. That right there, okay. And then I think I might have to approve you.
Doesn't make it easy for Zoom to share, does it?
No,
It's because we're not used to it. We're used to Google.
okay,
Mhm.
so.
I loved Google.
I do too.
Easy.
So again, this is not all current. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see the type of information that I thought we should share, and then to ask if there were any points that I didn't make that you would like to see included. So, board members, again, some of this is old. I have to update the seal of biliteracy and maybe do something different there, but try to highlight 3 of our staff members and a couple of our students who had great successes this year. Always provide just a general update on the status of enrollment, and you will see from the start of the school year to April, we decreased 24 students. I tried to identify where those are located. The majority were at the high school. And since 2014, we have declined by 122 students. Talk a little bit about the budget process, so that the elected officials can see and know where we began when you first glanced at the budget back in March, and how much work was done to actually bring in the budget at its current level. I also thought it would be really important to highlight the unallocated funds that Andrea shared with us at the last board meeting, to make sure people understand that we're going to be running out of funds soon. And that will impact how much we can use to offset taxpayers. So also included some of the highlights of where the increases and the changes really were centered. Salaries was probably our biggest factor. And I thought it was important to highlight why salaries were such a factor. You know, the fact that we had bus drivers that could go next door, drive 10 minutes and make $5 an hour more, or teachers could easily drive within 30 minutes, and those at the top of the scale and make $10,000 to $15,000 more. And then I tried to highlight the additions of the other positions and the health insurance and energy costs.
Wasn't there a big one to retirement as well?
Then,
Let me
page
get to
2,
it.
page 2.
There it is, right there.
Retirement,
Yeah.
a significant increase in the 17%. And then capital improvements, I tried to highlight the areas that we were designating most of our funds, our resources. And then, of course, special ed, and understanding that 13 out of district placements. And so if they're $100,000 each, just off the top, there's $1.3 million that we really have no control. And then there was also increase in the main care seed money and transportation to private, special private schools. Sorry, Chris made a noise. I didn't know if he was.
No, I'm good.
Then I thought I would also highlight some of the changes. So one is the eliminated appropriation for food service. Now that the state is paying for all of school lunches And as you can see with the information Andrea just reviewed, we're not spending it this year.
Mhm.
So we removed it from the budget for next year. We're reducing our weekend building checks down to just one day a weekend, November through the end of March. And that's the result of some increased technology that we have that we were able to fund using federal dollars. We actually were able to reduce some money out of the budget as a result of the 0% rate for health and dental insurance. A reminder, the middle school world language teaching position, it was removed, but it was done so that we could move a social studies teacher position from a federally funded position to a locally funded position. And then I thought it would be important to highlight here that the other thing is the high school cafeteria floor, which has asbestos and needs to be abated, that we were awarded money from school revolving fund, and that fund will pay for 68.77% of the project. So I wanted to make sure that members of the public knew that, and were aware that we are seeking outside funding whenever possible. So the work will be done over the summer. We always include article expenditures and what the difference, so that's pretty standard. What the increase, the total amount, and what that amount represents. The impact to taxpayers per thousand. And then every year we include the local versus state so that people can get a sense of where the money comes from. The majority of our funds actually come from state subsidy.
I like that.
Wow.
Do you like that?
Look at you.
I do like that
Okay. Does that have a fiscal note? Nice.
And then how do we spend the money? Where is the money spent? And of course, the majority of it goes into regular education or special education, and student support staff services, followed by facilities, transportation. And then this is really hard to see. So I will have a printout of this presentation because no one's going to be able to read this. What this highlights is the information I already shared with all of you. And that is a comparison of how much we spend per pupil compared to other school districts in the region, so that you can see what we're spending our money on. So the state average per pupil is at 16,248, and MSAD11 is at 12,846. And that is based on the most current information we have available through the Department of Education. And those numbers reflect expenditures from 21-22.
This is my favorite graph, and I don't think people see everything that's in it. Like, it compares us not only by total per pupil expenditures, but it compares us to everyone across all of the expenditure articles. So you can see what others are spending for regular education, special education. I just think there's a lot in it, and I don't think it's appreciated.
And we selected school districts that are in Kennebec County. We didn't select school districts that were in different parts of the state.
For the graph, right?
For the
But you
graph,
said the state average was
Right.
16,000, so that includes everybody.
correct.
Okay.
So
Correct, but we made sure we have like Winslow, we have Fairfield, because we're very similar to Fairfield. We have RSU 12, Augusta, Maranacook, Waterville, Skowhegan. We have RSU 4 in Litchfield, Sabatis, so that you really get a good sense of where we stand. Halldale, of course, RSU 2 is included.
So last year when I did this, we had other districts that we compared ourselves to that were more of similar size. When Pat presented to the board, she chose districts, and this year I redid it to mirror which she chose for the
Because we
district,
were-
for the area districts.
Because we were including districts like in Bath, or Brunswick. Yeah, and their demographics are just so different, so.
Camden, I think, was on the original.
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
So there's that,
Oh, gosh,
see?
you and that wrinkly paper,
I
I
know.
love it.
And this was a new slide that we created last year, to just show that there are 257 school districts in the state of Maine. And how many school districts spend less than we do in these categories? So overall total, there were only 39 school districts that spend less than we do. Last year, when I showed you this, it was 43. So we actually went down. Special education, you can see that there are 86. Systems administration, there are only 31 districts that spend less than we do for their central office. And then I have the student staff services and the facilities. When you look at the chart or the spreadsheet provided by the Department of Education, I don't understand it, but there are 56 schools that spend $0 under the category of student and staff support, and there are 53 that spend $0 under facilities maintenance. My guess is that a lot of those have to do with municipalities, and the municipalities may pay for some of those expenses.
Right.
Probably do the
So-
maintenance.
Do you think it would be more effective if we said like 161 school districts spend more than
I was just gonna ask
the
that.
other way?
It always snags in my head and makes me have to pause.
Because there's a lot more that spend more than we
Right.
do.
Right. It always causes me
Yeah,
to just,
at first glance, I didn't know if it's ranked best to worst or worst to best.
It's ranked highest to lowest, but you're right.
right.
Yeah, I think you can manipulate this better, this slide somehow.
Okay,
I think the information is good, but I think it's.
kind of switch it around. Okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
All right, then.
It always gets stuck in my head. Oh, my goodness.
Curtains, I like that one.
It doesn't take us much.
This is too
to be
fancy.
mean.
I know, that's
Spending too much money on PowerPoint.
I'm just learning how to use the technology.
too much fancy. Too funny.
So what this slide shows you is we've just selected 4 school districts that are most, that are located the closest to MSAD11. And what it does is it takes the difference between what they're spending per pupil versus what we spend per pupil minus debt service and CTE. And it then calculates what it would cost MSAD11 if we were spending at that same per pupil rate. So for the state, they're spending an additional $2,200 beyond what we spend per pupil. If you multiply that times 1919, then we would be adding $44,200,000 to our budget, okay? If we were RSU 4, would be adding over 1.6 million. If we were RSU 2, in Hollowell, we'd be adding 4.1 million. We'd be adding $500,000 if we were in RSU 2. And then in Augusta, they spend less than we do once you take out the debt service and the CTE. They have been able to close some schools and combine schools, like their middle school is located with their high school. It's in the same building, so they don't operate those separate buildings like we do. And I know they've closed at least one elementary school. So due to that consolidation, which is what we've talked about a little bit, this demonstrates how they were able to save funds as a result.
The city owns those schools, so maintenance and facilities comes out of the city budget,
City
not the
budget.
school budget, because that'd be a big savings too.
Yes, there, I know in speaking with John, who used to work for us, that the city maintains all of the exterior portions of all the grounds, right? They do the
And that comes
mowing,
out of
they do
Parks
the
and Rec.
plowing,
That comes
all of
out
that.
of Or Public Works for the city and not
Correct.
the school, so there's a
So
savings there too.
You're right, you are correct.
But the inside cleaning as well as the building maintenance itself
That's
should be
from the school.
charged to the school.
To the school, right?
But outside is a lot, and I mean, there's some
Oh, it
savings
is a
there,
lot,
so.
yeah.
Well, if you think of your plowing, your sanding,
Yeah,
all
all
of,
that comes out of the city
all that stuff,
budget,
right.
which is why
Paving.
their cost is less. In
Fields
reality,
and
it's
all
not, if
Right.
you Public Works budget,
Paving of parking lots, who does
Yeah.
that?
They
All comes out of city.
probably
City.
city.
Public Works.
No, wouldn't that be great?
So there's that. Here's the 10-year average, the funding history for the total budget, the local allocation, and then how that breaks down per community.
Can I just ask, because I see a lot of different spending charts. FY 19, 20, 21 are so out of range for everything, everywhere. Long range averages are pretty badly skewed.
Yeah.
I guess that's up to you. What point do you want to make with this chart? But if you dug into those numbers, you'd see some pretty wild fluctuations.
Yeah, I don't remember what we looked at like in 20.
I just brought it up and looked at it. I mean, you thinking 5-year, you thinking 8-year, you thinking,
I've given up on everything except 21 forward.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, there's some logic to that.
I mean, that's entirely up to all of you. Historically, we've
Yeah.
provided that history.
I
It's
think I
not,
have I have a spreadsheet upstairs that goes back to 1994. That's how long I've been tracking it.
And I think that information is very useful, but I also think Cullen has a point. I mean, something has really truly changed since 2021. And it speaks to one of our board members saying, a gallon of milk is $5. That's since a pandemic and things are different.
What
It's,
you miss when you don't have that long term is, I mean, you see how long things stayed the same.
yes.
Like we really weren't passing along much of an increase and then you see a decrease. And you're missing that. I know it's not relevant, but I mean, you can see how hard we have tried over the years to.
Oh, I think that's really relevant. I mean, we're not a district that
if you look at,
wildly spends.
I think it's the last 2 years. Last 2 years, you're going to see the largest increases in our budget than you will have seen in years. And so the last 2 years is what is actually increasing these numbers. It's up to you whether you feel it's valuable to have the history or not.
I would just feel bad if a town manager stood up and said, well, why can't you hold it to 3.5% when we all know that the fixed costs are through the roof? And that's not something that the district has done.
Right.
That's inflation.
Can we do a bit of both?
What does that mean?
Well, I think the history is very important, but I also think it's valuable to recognize the changes that have occurred since 2020, 2021. I just think both are valuable to see.
Like if there's one point to hammer home for the public, I think, it's that this is not an expansive school budget. This is not a case that the district is reaching out to put up a new building, raise a ton of salaries, change up the curriculum, add a new fleet. None of that. This is fixed costs out of control. And like we can't manage that at this level.
And the problem that we're having isn't exclusive to MSAD11. I mean, everyone's having the same issues. Whether you're a school or whether you're a town or it's just.
So should I kind of going back to the slide that outlines the various increases, should I tie a dollar figure to the salary increases? Would that
I was
help
thinking
people
that.
understand?
I was thinking that in the beginning. One of the very first slides, when you're talking about the biggest expenditures, salaries is $1 million of it.
Yeah.
That's collectively bargained. That's nothing you can do anything with.
Right.
Do you know the document
So-
that I shared with the finance committee that basically
Had-
reviewed?
Outlines the
Increases.
increases and decreases?
Yes.
I think that would be,
Because then they can look down through that and be like, all right, well, salaries, you can throw that out. The only concern I have is if they get stuck in those 4 positions, but we can defend those all day long. We've talked
Oh my
about it for
gosh.
years.
Yeah.
But everything else in there is main PERS, health insurance, utility. There's a $200,000 capital increase and they can see the increases there. Nothing outlandish, like Colin said, there's nothing that's gonna stand out and say, well, why are you doing that?
No,
That list kind of shows.
And then you stack it up against the spending per pupil surrounding schools.
Correct.
This has always been a thing.
Right.
So I do think that would be helpful.
So maybe what I'll do is continue with the breakdown as I provide it so that really see
highlights.
some of the specific examples of what we're doing. And then in the following slide, provide the detail. Yeah, okay, all right. If I do that, do you want to just get rid of this one entirely? I still am not certain what I would do with this one.
How has it been received in the past? I mean, is this something that they really care to see, or is this kind of like, all right, next slide?
Don't recall getting any feedback on it.
Then I don't know if you need it. I would have it, Pat, available
We
if
will
they
have
ask.
the document, we have, as Andrea said, a
Somebody will
document that
select it.
actually
You wanna
dates
see
back
how
to
much we
1994.
Passed along in 1994 and every year since.
Okay, why don't I delete, okay.
There's some things that stick out in my mind. I am never been a numbers person, but when you said Fairfield is the one we're the most like, I'd say that a lot because not to be unkind, but if you drive through Fairfield, it's a pretty poor town, it seems to me. I realize I don't know from the surface everything, but compared to the city of Gardner and our surrounding towns, it seems to me that if they're the ones we're the closest with, not that we want to say anything disparaging about anything, but that would really sink home to some people. And the other thing is, I always recall that you said our starting pays for teachers are pretty much what the others have. Maybe that's because of the state, I'm not sure. But after about 10 years, they sink and we can lose good teachers. And these maybe there are things you can't show that way, but I don't know, you must have got that from somewhere to get that in there because that's how we can't get excellent teachers sometimes, Those things I think of more than I think of numbers and charts because my mind doesn't go that way.
Yeah, I mean, I included that statement where you can easily drive within 30 minutes and see an
Yes.
increase in $10,000 to $15,000, right?
But I thought you
Let
were
me-
talking about the districts that we're comparing ourselves to, that they, after a certain amount of years, like 8 or 10 years, their teachers are making more money than we are.
It depends which unit you're talking about. You can go to Waterville right now, if I recall correctly, and at the top of the scale with a CAS or a doctorate, and they're already making $80,000 a year. Whereas
Don't
I
give them
think we're,
ideas.
huh?
Don't give them ideas.
Oh, sorry. And we're at maybe 72. So that's just one example. But let me think about that. Let me look at what I
Just think about it, I'm
have.
sure your mind, you know more about it
And the
than
state
I do.
minimum is gonna go up to 50.
Yeah.
And so when and if that happens, that minimum, you do that
Gotta
at
do it for the
the bottom,
others.
but it's gonna go all the way up.
So I was going to add this to the bottom of the agenda, but since you're talking about it, I will give you some new information that crossed my desk today. So there's a bill called it's LD 974. And I'm told it passed today, but I don't know what that means. It may have just come out of committee. I'm not really sure the status. And what the bill is going to do is it's going to, what was the number? It would be for all support staff, hourly staff, except for ed techs. They would
Yes, yep.
receive 150% of minimum wage. Minimum wage is at $13.80. So starting pay for all of them would be $21.20, I think it came to. Whereas we have some who are right now, your base is at $15.
And that's unfunded or funded?
Unfunded, it'd be funded locally.
Yeah.
And for ed techs, it would be 200%. So if we have a base at $15 an hour for an ed tech 1 with 0 experience, it would bring their starting salary up to over $27, which is an $11.50 an hour increase. So I asked Andrea to run the numbers. Tell me if this bill passes, what does that mean for our community? And these are not firm numbers, they're just estimates, but For support staff alone, the increase would be $1.1 million to our local
Here's the
community.
actual bill.
It's been modified. So there it says 133% and 125%. It's been changed to 150% and 200%. I actually have a meeting tomorrow morning to talk about this more with my colleagues. So there's a lot of concern that school districts will not be able to afford this type of increase that would go into effect 24-25 is what I heard. So that means next budget.
Yep.
Off the top, you know, you're adding another $1.1 million. And that doesn't take into account anything that we've negotiated with like teachers. So.
And just so that you know, I didn't just grab a number. I basically made a copy of our budget and redid all of the salary scales for all of the positions as listed and updated them and then hit redo and compared it. So it's, while Pat says it's pretty darn close to what, if those are the figures that we're looking at, it's pretty much close to what the increase would be.
So if you're concerned, as school board members, I would encourage you to reach out to your local legislators. We, you know, our hourly staff, all of our staff, they deserve to receive a livable, working, right? A livable salary. I mean, we do our best to pay them just that.
But the ramifications go beyond just those staff.
Absolutely.
Because if
Correct.
that staff is now making X amount of dollars and you get teachers that, or people with advanced degrees that are making the
Right.
same or less, then
Right.
they're gonna come back in 3 years and
And I
it's
don't,
just.
They're not gonna wait 3
there's a
years.
lot
They're gonna
to it.
ask us to reopen the contract if that
Well,
happens
and-
before the end of it.
and I understand wanting to have a higher salary. But the other thing is that in school districts, we have hourly staff, support staff who are working 180 days a year. And they're receiving 100% paid health insurance and dental insurance for 12 months.
Single.
Single. But, and the district pays 70% for anything beyond a single. So if you work 9 months, you're still getting 100% single insurance. Single insurance in our district for a year is $11,000.
It's $1,000 a month, so it's about $12,000 a year for single choice plus.
So anyway,
And so, however, so with that, what is the deductible and what is the maximum out-of-pocket cost? I mean, those are important pieces too.
So there are 4 plans that we offer. You know, at 70%
trying
on
to
some of our
let the
plans.
public know.
If you are a family on the Choice Plus plan, the employee's portion is close to $500-600 a month. So there are other plans that have a higher deductible that have a lower monthly premium. So they have options. So, and what I will say is, while it sounds, and we are very generous with our health insurance benefits, at 70%, we are one of the lowest as far as the contribution rate for health insurance compared to the other districts. I've looked at 95 and 90. I mean, I think I've only seen one other at 70%.
I want to say
So-
Augusta is the only other school district that spends at 70%. The majority are higher. And I'm glad you said that because I was just going to chime in. This is not, that benefit is not unique to MSAD 11. That is a benefit that is commonplace in school districts around the state. So, but it is a benefit. I then move on. I'm going to keep us moving forward. We talked about a bond to upgrade the facility. And these were examples of some of the items that we would include in a bond. I don't know if you still want me to present this. I did it last year. Do you want me to do it again? And then, of course, there is the discussion about a consolidated elementary school. So I don't know how you feel about this slide.
I think it's good for them to know that there is substantial capital work down the road. Maybe just leave out the word bond and just describe the problem and say, these are known future needs, which we will jointly have to address in the future.
And not future wants, their needs, absolutely.
Is your concern with the word bond, Colin?
Means money.
Yes, it does.
Like some of it's just language tricks, but even like in your slide deck, instead of saying decreases, call it savings. People
Okay.
like savings, they don't like decreases.
What are the new
Love
gym,
that, Colin.
the new gym floors for the 3 elementary schools there? I don't need a figure, but I'm thinking of what that would cost, and if we did get a new consolidated school, which might not be for a few years,
Right.
is putting something into a building we won't own.
That is absolutely a conversation the board needs to have.
Absolutely.
Each of those floors run roughly about, I think the current estimate is around $40,000 each. But they need to be replaced, that's for certain. And then I always do a little bit about adult ed. So these are just some highlights. And then, there we go, the cute little kiddos. Yeah, and these are pictures from last year. I haven't had a chance to update them yet, but any other major topic that you believe should be incorporated into the presentation?
I just had one note I made while you were showing it. The special placements, like clearly that's a big ticket item. Is there a way that you can, I guess when I saw it, I wasn't sure, is this typical, atypical, a big increase expected? Again, just to show like some of these fixed costs that we really can't do anything about and we need to provide for. You know, it's just what it is.
It is what it is. We actually send fewer students out to these special private schools than a lot of our other neighboring school districts. And if you go back to the slide, comparisons, what we spend for special education, while it is a lot, we spend less per pupil than most of our neighboring school districts. So you were gonna add something?
I was just going to say, originally, I think there were 19 special purpose private school placements in the budget, and I think it was reduced to 13. Part of the reason for the reduction is the special ed reserve account. I don't know whether that is something that we need to include, that,
That we have those funds, yeah.
well, that's how we're solving a long-term problem with a short-term solution, right?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
Let's all just get through the next year, okay?
Right.
Good point.
Excellent point. Okay, so that's what I have. We'll work on it and be prepared to give this presentation on Monday. I certainly hope that members of the finance committee will chime in, will share their thoughts, their experience, and so it's not just an administrator-led conversation. You know, I think it's really important from elected official to elected official for everyone to know and understand that you are familiar with this budget, you do know what's in it, and you are supporting the budget that's being put forth to the taxpayers.
Since you excused administrators from that meeting, I just assumed that I didn't have to be there.
Yeah, I think I said minus you. Minus you, Terry, and
How do you want it to turn out?
I think Angela, did I say Angela?
I don't know who you, I did not see that part.
So that's what I have.
Next on the agenda. A discussion about a consolidated elementary school.
So I requested that this be placed on the agenda because we continue to have you continue to have conversations about it. It keeps coming up. But there has been no clear directive from the finance committee or the board that you want the administration to start spending some time doing some research. And so I think we're at a place where we need to either just stop talking about it or begin taking some action.
I think in one of the meetings, I can't remember if it was a finance or a board, I had mentioned putting something together as far as places that you think you could see savings by doing this. Start putting some numbers on paper. I'm not talking about site locations and school designs and all that kind of stuff. I'm just talking big picture. If we were to seriously consider a consolidated elementary school, these are the anticipated areas that we could expect some savings and what those numbers would kind of look like. And I'm ballparking, like, just kind of start that conversation in that direction. Because if there isn't a lot of savings, then maybe we're not gonna have this discussion. But if there's a pile of it, then maybe we push it a little harder, a little further.
So to expand upon that, Chris, here's my thought. I think that there's more information that we need to gather first to be able to inform the board. So maybe this summer, we schedule a meeting with the Department of Education. Given the size of, given the number of students that we have, I need to know what square footage a brand new school would be. Just roughly, okay, given our need. We have CDS, right? There is an expectation that school districts are going to need to begin supporting students in CDS age 3 and up. We don't have space currently for that, so the building would have to be large enough to accommodate that as well. Pre-K, we have a half-day program. The real push around the country is to make that full-day program. We need more space. We don't have enough classrooms to be able to do that now. So if we met with the Department of Education, let's find out just ballpark, what would the square footage need to be? If the square footage is, say, 100,000 square feet, who knows? What's the acreage that we need? All right, so if we need 15 acres, 20 acres, we have land near the middle school, right, attached to the middle school. How much land do we have? You know, and begin compiling some of that information in addition to what you're asking for, Chris, to be able to put that in front of you. You know, a 30-year bond, right? If what is right now the construction cost per square foot? So what would that look like for a bond? And if you do a 30-year bond, and we anticipate that the savings is going to be 1.5 million, and it's going to cost $1.8 million a year, or is it going to cost $1 million a year? And try to begin compiling some of that information so that you can make a decision.
That's kind of exactly where I was headed.
Yeah.
There is also a distinction between whether or not we're going to talk about locally funding our project or waiting to see whether or not
State.
we make it on the state list, because that will make a huge difference.
Correct.
As opposed to how much the savings, so to speak.
Besides the savings, which are very important, I think, Becky, you mentioned once possible programs, our dreams for what could be. We wouldn't have to be tied to it, but it's what the direction we want to go in.
I think it would be very fiscally prudent of us
to explore it, but I agree, Diane. I think it has to be more than just the savings. How will this benefit the student population as well, in terms of programs? And that's why I tried to outline pre-K, you know, our ability to make it a full day program, potentially taking care of our younger students, our younger community based children and who are connected to CDS. And there are lots of other.
Having all of our special ed services in one place. And
Absolutely.
the amount of work that can be done together across grade levels in one place.
Yeah.
I think some of the arguments that, I'm old enough to remember the last fight over it, but like it was said that, you know, people wanted community schools And that it isn't really like that anymore. I mean, not totally, I'm sure somebody plays with the kid next door and stuff like that. But I know my granddaughter, it goes to Riverview and she doesn't know anybody from South Gardner. And I was trying to remember, because you said you'd like to know about the history, and I won't go into the history
Well, I saw
in
James take a
depth.
poke at you.
But I think we were only going to take away the elementary school in South Gardner. And I don't even think it was the Praise Street School then. Would you have any knowledge of it?
So when the time came to build a new school, we were only supposed to build Laura E. Richards School. We came back to the state, and basically the state said that they would fund the amount for Laura Richards School. Then we would have to pick up, it was discussed that we wanted another school in South Gardner. So then we ended up picking up the difference in the projects. So that's how we ended up getting two schools at that time.
It was that, I'm sure you're correct, but I recall Mayor Rhines, who was from South Gardner, he and his family were very upset that school building, which is now the Head Start building down there, I believe, and they were gonna lose that because of communities. And I recall, I hope I can remember it right, him standing with some signs or whatever in front of Hannaford, which I don't think you can do anymore, saying, to you folks in West Gardner and Pittston and Randolph, your schools will be next. They're gonna take away stuff. And it was threatening to people. And I heard somebody say, that school building you wanna build, if it had been one school, South Gardner, it's gonna be like a factory for those poor little kids, you know? I can see that bubbling up again, you know? I think Jim has there's some good reasons why some of that stuff will come up, but I think, I personally feel that our reasons can educate people.
Oh my gosh, I grew up in Maine, but my dad is from Philadelphia. He went to a school with 3,000 kids.
Yes, right, yes.
Right.
He's just gonna laugh at me.
Community schools in other parts of the country are much bigger than, I mean,
Any of
it
our.
can- yeah, it can be thousands and thousands of students. And it'll still be a community school. I mean, we're not a giant community, even if it's probably 10,000 if you go across the whole SAD, that's just not.
They have county schools. Going out west and down
Yes.
south, they have county school districts. They
Right.
don't have what we have up
No,
here.
when I go to my
I mean, there are layers
NSBA
and
things,
layers of administration.
yeah,
Mhm.
the NSBA schools,
districts are
the
so
community
big.
schools are 10,000, some,
Mhm.
I mean, thousands and thousands.
There'd be
Much
some
bigger.
planning. We wouldn't put the pre-K right next to the 5th grade, you know, there'd be some planning.
You would design the school.
You
Yeah,
would design it so that everything,
Pods and-
absolutely,
yeah.
so that everyone was where they needed to
And I
be.
think if you move forward, it would be essential that the school board reach out to the communities
Mhm.
and make sure that you really engage the communities in trying to see what their needs are, what's important to them, and try to fold that into a project.
Could I name a few things that I personally love to see in a preliminary report, knowing that like you can only do so much with the hours at hand, but I'd love to see included a 10-year demographic for the 4 towns. Because Maine is old and likely to get older. And that is very
There's a
important.
cost associated with that.
So if we're going to see declining enrollment as a fact for a decade, we have a responsibility to plan for that.
You want that on the front end, that's gonna, I don't remember how much that costs.
We haven't had one done for,
Is that the live
So
births?
I don't think you need to go further than the census data. There's some pretty good materials out there. I'd be happy to share what I have if you'd like.
Okay.
I don't think you need to pay anybody to come and do a full consulting. This is this is a
Okay,
rough pass.
all right.
But nobody's rushing in to have families with 6 kids
not anymore.
in the town.
No.
So that would be one piece. 2, an assessment on your part of knowing that rough decline in enrollment. What's the tipping point for the schools to really need to consolidate? Because there's those irreducible minimums to keep it up and running where suddenly like your number of pupils served kind of drops. is to, it'd be really nice to know how's it impact the transportation? I think that's really important to kids, to parents. You know, are we gonna ask anybody to be doing more than a, 15, 20-minute bus ride?
Oh, we're asking people to do
So
that more
knowing
now.
exactly like,
Mhm.
if you live in this ring around this theoretical site, what sort of impact does that mean for you? Because that's a real punishment on some families.
Yes, we actually were talking about that earlier. We already have students who are on the bus for an hour. So if you
Nothing
have.
good
Just knowing
happens
what
in that.
percent
Like
so-
3 miles from the school and they're on the bus for 45 minutes, so.
It wouldn't be any different than transporting kids to the middle school. I mean, I understand that are younger, I mean, we do it now, right?
But there's a difference between an 11-year-old and a 4-year-old.
And there's the secondary impact too, especially with the littlest kids. Like we had a really lovely school concert last week. It was super cute. If you are living at the edge of the transportation zone and you as a working parent have to drive 30 minutes each way, those things add up. You really don't get to participate in the life of your little kid. So that would be important to know. If at all, it'd be nice to know how that impacts adult ed opportunities, because again, if we're gonna see a larger number of elderly folks in the community, it's important to have them as a stakeholder. Maybe there's opportunities in the design that lends itself to that. Shoot, one more. Yeah, and is there any federal money out there to make it a net neutral or net positive building and save all the energy cost in electric and gas?
All I know is that we're not going to have the same kind of heat pumps that we have.
Yeah.
So I know it's a
I
big
will do
list.
my best. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer all of those questions, but certainly I'll take a look at that. I don't know of any, I know that there are federal dollars out there. I think the question will be the time frame. If this moves forward, if it's 5 years out, will those federal dollars still be available?
Yeah.
And if the federal dollars won't be made available, is it worth trying to move more quickly so that we can? I know, but I know things take time, but I think the way you approach it with the community is also really, that has to be very strategic, that we're not doing something to anyone, we're trying to do more for you. And it's more than just lower taxes, it's really about being able to service the students that we have, because there's so many needs and so many requirements that we want to do it in the best way we can, and to have so many buildings that are so spread out.
Yeah.
It makes it difficult.
I mean, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for consolidation in this meeting at all. I think the options and the trade-offs need to be transparent for the entire
Oh,
community.
absolutely,
And give
absolutely,
everybody a lot of
That's
chances
where
to
I'm at
speak up.
too.
absolutely.
Yeah, I need to see what it looks like, obviously, and I
Yeah.
think everybody needs to see what it looks like.
And it took us a very long time to make any headway or progress with TC Hamlin. And that had been going on probably for 15 years. I can remember going across there when they still had 100+ students in the building.
But when we chose to close TC Hamlin, there was 30 kids in there, and that was not
40
what,
something.
I
Is
thought
that
it was
it?
60, but
I
still.
thought we were down, really, we were down low.
Yeah, it was
And that
very
is
low.
definitely not what's in the best interest of either
No,
kids or teachers, or, I mean, it's.
there was no climate to that, and I know people got upset by that, but it quickly went away when they saw how much fun their kids were having being all together with all the other kids. So,
I think consolidation brings opportunity.
agreed.
So we will work on that. That may be summer, right? A summer assignment.
It's a good
but
summer project, yeah.
we'll
It's a
work
good
on
summer
that.
project.
So that then brings us to the LED lighting. Do you want to just give us a brief update on that?
So I'm trying to think, probably the beginning of the calendar year, Gabe and I and Pat sat with you and talked about an opportunity to do a lighting retrofit project at all of our schools. We talked to a company to just walk through to see if there was opportunity for savings. And based on a report, they think there are plenty of opportunity for savings to the tune of over $1 million. So with schools and with bonding or borrowing, there are statutes that we need to follow. Basically, if you are borrowing money, you need to go out to referendum to ask the taxpayers to borrow these large sums. The exception is what you have heard us talk about. It's called a performance contract. There basically needs to be guaranteed savings, savings that are guaranteed for, is it every year of the contract or for so many years of the contract? And if not, then the company that does the work for you has to write the check to pay for whatever savings are missing. So we have a performance contract in place. At the end of every year, they give us a huge report that Pat and I can't make heads or tails out of because there are so many scientific calculations. But it is their way of showing that they have hit their target. So in order to do that kind of a project, the state allows you to bypass the referendum, going out to referendum. However, you need to hire, in order to do so, the way that it's done is very prescriptive. You have to hire an ESCO, somebody who basically oversees the project. So you have to do a request for qualifications and hire an ESCO, somebody who oversees. And then after that, you have to go out to bids. We have basically run out of time to be able to do this lighting retrofit project this year. We don't have time, or we didn't have time to, with everything else going on, we didn't have time to vet it with you, to show what they intended to do or what their thoughts were. And there were opportunities that were missed out with Efficiency Maine. However, there are other opportunities that still remain in place after July 1st. So not sure where I'm going with this conversation. So I'm just making you aware that while we have put the project on a shelf for a little bit, it's our intention to eventually to move forward with this. I think it goes hand in hand with the conversation that we're having now with the consolidation of the elementary schools. You often hear me talk about how we currently have a performance contract that we're paying for Hamlin for a school that we no longer have. And that is my intention, that we don't do this moving forward, or if we do, that we have some plan to pay off what we owe for if we should sell the buildings. But these two things go hand in hand. And while we want to move forward, the timing just wasn't right for a variety of reasons.
You need to make sure the timing is right, again, moving forward, because it took some dancing and wrangling to make the TC Hamlin project work and the sale of that building. And if we're looking at a over $1 million performance contract, I just want to make sure that we're all on board with the type of savings we're going to use. Basically, it's lighting fixtures and controls. We've all seen our supply cost almost triple or double rather, from our last supply contract to this contract. It was just bad timing when we had to go out to bid. So it would make sense for us to become more efficient. But it's a conversation that we'll need to resume.
Is their performance based on replacement cost of fixtures or also the energy savings from the
It's
lighting?
based on both.
So depending on the market rate of energy, you get a better or worse deal.
So they indicate that they're very conservative when they put their numbers together, and they're estimating about an 8-year return on the investment, which is actually pretty low compared to what we did in the past. That was a different project
That was-
entirely.
That
had
project
to do
is
with-
much bigger.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
was HVAC work, not just lighting. And there are incentives through efficiency main of a bit over $100,000. So we want to make sure that we can take advantage of that if at all possible, but kind of tying back to the conversation that we just
Yeah.
had, how much money do you want to invest if the buildings aren't going to be owned by the district in 8 years? So it's a conversation for another day, but we wanted to make sure that we put that back on your radar. So,
And that's all for this agenda.
that is all for this agenda.
Future agenda items, is there anything that,
I don't currently anticipate you needing to meet for finance in June. You don't meet in July, but keep in mind, we have the budget meeting on June 6th. You have the referendum on the 13th. And following the 13th, you will have to have a special meeting to accept the results of the 13th. So you will be meeting plenty of times.
Plenty of times before we're done for
in
the year.
June. So, but I don't see any reason at this point to meet
if
in,
something pops?
yeah,
Yeah.
which it may.
Yeah.
I don't have anything.
Okay,
All right,
then meeting adjourned at 6:52.
great, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.